Welcome to the Business of Apparel podcast. This is the place to learn how to start and scale your own apparel brand and fill it with loyal customers for years to come. I'm your host, Rachel Erickson, owner and CEO of Unmarked Street. I can't wait to share this episode with you. Welcome back to the Business of Apparel podcast. Today we are taking a break from our specific series, our 7-part series, to speak with Deb Boulanger, who I am so pleased to be connected with through one of my entrepreneur groups. Deb is the founder of the Launch Lab for Women Entrepreneurs and previously of The Great Do-Over. She is also the amazing host of the Life After Corporate podcast. And thank you, Deb. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, Rachel. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be just so relevant because the more and more that I've gotten into consulting in the apparel industry, the more that I've seen that a lot of people who come out to start apparel brands are coming from corporate and not necessarily apparel land corporate, but all over the place in corporate offices. And so I'm really excited to have you share your experience today and your knowledge about that. And I'd love for you to just kind of start with what has life after corporate been like for you? Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I think life after corporate starts with life. And as successful women leaders, as women executives, that didn't come without some cost. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was emotional cost. Maybe there was a family cost involved. And so about 10 years ago, I found myself at the crossroads of getting a divorce, hitting menopause, and my mother's dementia advancing pretty rapidly. And I was also at that time leading an internal startup. So I was an intrapreneur in corporate. And that program had taken off, and suddenly I had 53 people working for me. It was 32 million of revenue that we now had to retain.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of pressure. And even though I did a lateral move initially, it just became clear to me that in order to navigate what was going in my life, I had to leave corporate.
I love that. That's so good. I'd love for you to speak a little bit. You mentioned the word intrapreneur, and I think that's something I've learned more about as I've become an entrepreneur, as opposed to being inside the corporate world. I'd love for you to speak just a little bit about that and kind of how do you define an intrapreneur?
Yeah. So if you are an entrepreneur now and you follow the breadcrumbs back, you didn't suddenly flip a switch to entrepreneurship. You always had this ability to spot trends, spot patterns, solve problems, create solutions when problems emerged. You were probably a natural leader from the time you were a child. And even if you didn't have the self-confidence to always stand up front, you had some type of leadership capability. So all these latent talents from childhood all the way through the corporate world, if you start following your own breadcrumbs, you were destined for entrepreneurship because everything that you had done up until this point of time led you here.
Wow. Yeah. I definitely resonate with that. And I think we've talked about that just a little bit before. And I think that's really important for people to understand that there's an element of that actually happens at corporate before you even consider kind of leaving it. And if you kind of recognize that in yourself, I think that's key there. So tell us a little bit about when you meet with these women and they're kind of itching to get out of corporate and they're looking for kind of the next chapter in their life. Talk to us a little bit about what the beginning of that process looks like so people could maybe expect, this is how I could start.
Yeah. So and it doesn't make a difference if you're a product entrepreneur or you're a service entrepreneur. So just to be clear, the first step when you step outside those corporate doors is to monetize your expertise. And one of the mistakes that I made, so it's best told through mistake stories, is that I threw everything out. It's like I was a newly minted health coach, a holistic health coach. And I was applying my holistic health training to myself, as well as getting a personal trainer and a nutritionist and all of that to reinvent me at this new stage. But I also wanted to just walk away from corporate so bad
Yeah.
that I left everything that I learned behind. And I think that was a mistake. And as we alluded to just moments before, it was a culmination of your entire lifetime experience. So looking at your newest credential as an addition, not an instead of your corporate experience was key to me. And even though it was my job in corporate to launch new service offerings, so product development in the services space was in my DNA. I had also been in marketing, I had been in sales. So you could say, you know, oh my God, Deb, you had the whole package.
You did.
And you go from corporate where you have a budget, a finance department, a sales team, a marketing team, and all these resources that you get to pull from. And suddenly you're on your own.
Yeah.
And not only that, you're in an e-commerce world. You're in a digital marketing world. And for me, 10 years ago, digital marketing wasn't where it's at right now. It was a whole new ballgame. It's a whole new way of selling. It's a whole new way of marketing. It's a whole new way of delivering services. So for me, it was like, oh, I need help. Who can coach me?
Yeah.
Who has already accomplished this? Who has done it well? And the first thing I did was hire a coach.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. I was actually speaking with someone just yesterday about exactly that and how crucial it is to, you know, when you're out there kind of on your own, to have a coach and to have a community that you can be a part of to cheer you on and help you realize that, you know, some of the hard days are normal and it's okay to be struggling with some of these things. And so I agree that is super important. You know, when we were chatting a little bit before, you had mentioned that a key issue that a lot of the startups, like, so when people start building their brands or building their companies, is that they have a really hard time finding demand for their product before they start creating supply. And I will say, like, I am definitely a victim of that. I was one of those people who started putting something out there that wasn't maybe necessarily being asked for. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how that might be one of the first things people really think about in that kind of market research phase.
Yeah, that's such a key point, Rachel, because entrepreneurship is a long game and it's not the easy road. So if you are going to put your sweat equity into building this business, we want to make sure that people want to buy what you're selling. And the number one reason for failure for businesses is no market need. So we want to make sure that let's test before you invest a lot of time, before you invest a lot of effort into your marketing and your sales. Let's test to make sure that people want what you're selling. And by the way, having one-on-one conversations with your ideal customers brings you so many insights into what the product must have and what it must include, what's nice to have. So it helps you with your development effort. It also gives you the key marketing key marketing language to use to attract your ideal buyer to you. It gets you a sense of price sensitivity and a sense of how would someone value what I'm offering and how do they think about value. So done well, and I say that specifically because having an effective market research conversation is an art and a science. It's not just, hey, this is my idea, what do you think?
Yeah.
It's really a purposeful way to question someone who matches an ideal buyer profile to get input into your product and your marketing.
Wow. Amazing. And do you typically recognize, like for me, I've been doing honestly that market research as I've been building my company. And it's taken me a couple of years to get to a point where I feel comfortable, like, okay, this is what I'm offering now. I know I've got it. But do you recognize that most people kind of do that during their transition out of corporate, or people doing it while they're still in their corporate jobs?
Yeah. I mean, you have a choice, right? If you have a corporate job where you can carve out a little bit of time and do that market research before you're full into the business, then that's ideal. If your schedule doesn't afford you that, then you want to sock away enough money so that you're not underfunded and you can do the market research. It's the first step, right? So I'm your first stop. Once you leave corporate, you leave the doors behind, you celebrate, you detox, and then you call Deb because, otherwise it's not worth the pain and suffering to not get it right. Right. So if you can do it before you leave, great. If not, it's your first stop.
I love that. I love that. And you talked a little bit about funding. And I know, one of the reasons I feel like I'm so drawn to you, Deb, is just because you are so authentic and realistic with your audience. Like, it's one thing to tell people, yeah, leave your corporate job. You can make so much more money. But let's talk a little bit about what's realistic and like what
Yeah.
people can expect maybe in their first 1 to 2 years outside of corporate life. Maybe not just in the way of pay and salary, but also in the way of kind of like a mental shift and an emotional shift too.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is a mindset shift. And so my mother-in-law used to always say, wherever you go, there you are.
I love
And it's true. Wherever you go, there you are. It's like your mindset's going to follow you. So if you've struggled with scarcity mindset, if you have a lot of anxiety, fear, self-judgment, I don't care what label you give it,
Yeah.
then that will just be amplified as you step into this new arena that's new. Because everything in your system is going to fire and say, danger, danger, whoa, be careful. And so you have to learn how to dance with fear. Fear's not going to go away. Fear isn't your enemy. You're not meant to be fearless.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as fearless, because once you feel like you've conquered fear in one form, it'll just show up in another disguise and just trick you. So you want to definitely manage the mindset shifts required for entrepreneurship, which are not to be underestimated. Yeah. And then from there, it's surrounding yourself with the right people,
Yeah.
making sure you have the right support, and to fund yourself. So it's going to take a while, depending on what your corporate salary was. And so I had a conversation with a woman a few weeks ago who had already retained another coach to help her launch her business. And she said, well, I need to replace my $400,000 salary in a year because I'm the primary wage earner in my family.
Oh, wow.
And unless
400.
you have people who are standing by, ready to pay you for big contracts, then there's no way in 12 months' time you're going to be able to replace a $400,000 salary. I'm sure it happens,
Sure.
but it would be the exception rather than the rule. The rule usually is it takes about 2 to 3 years to ramp up to replace a substantial salary. And I've tested that with many, many people, because let's face it, you're going to have fits and starts. You're going to pivot. You're going to go down one road and say, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't quite right. I want to slightly pivot to this different area.
Yep.
And so you have to allow yourself that time to experiment and find your lane, find the thing that you want to be known for, find what differentiates you in the market from other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say too, we're talking about replacing salary here, which I think is very different from like even when I started my business, there was a gross revenue goal. And I think it was very clear to me very quickly that does not equate to salary in any way,
Right.
because you still need to run your business. And as you grow and as you need more team members, that money goes out the door as opposed to staying in your own pocket. And so I think that that's really important to also understand. We're talking about a salary replacement here, which ends up being a percentage of what your gross revenue is. Do you have a recommended percentage that people pay themselves out of their gross revenue?
Oh, that's so interesting. I don't have a recommended percentage. I'm a huge fan of a couple of financial philosophies, and one is profit first.
Yes.
So that money comes in, you divide it up in all your buckets. And I am always fearful of having to owe taxes. So I have a big tax bucket.
Me too. Yeah.
And I always have more than enough in my tax bucket to pay my taxes. And then usually there's enough left over in there at the end of the year to invest in a SEP or some other financial investment for me personally. But you need to pay yourself a fair market wage, and it'll take you a little while to get there.
Yeah.
And the reason why you need to pay yourself a fair market wage and be on payroll is because if anything ever happened to you and you needed to hire someone to step into an interim CEO role to run the company while you dealt with whatever was going on in your life, and you were not accounting for that in your finances, that you would be screwed at that point, because you wouldn't have the money to invest, because you hadn't considered your profits you were just taking profits. So a lot of people start as a sole proprietor or an LLC, and all the profits from the business pass through to you, which is advantageous from a tax perspective, not advantageous from an understanding your profitability.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge fan of numbers. I love the book, Simple Talk, Straight Talk, Simple Numbers, Big Profits.
Okay.
By Greg Crabtree.
Love it.
Straight Talk, Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits, I believe is how it goes. The author is Greg Crabtree. And if you're looking to invest in the growth of your business after payroll, you should have 15% profit.
Great. That's great.
So that's after you've paid your staff, after you've paid all your expenses, after you've paid yourself, 15% profit to reinvest in the growth of the business. And the more successful you are, the more important that is.
Yes. So good. Such good, important information there. Thank you. Do you have any great stories for of clients that you've worked with that you'd love to share, like a major success story, or maybe even like a kind of a bit of a failure story that we could learn from that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, so you're hitting me 30 minutes after I just closed the container of my 6-figure accelerator.
Oh my God.
And so there were tears,
Oh.
People were accomplishing some 2 years in that program, some a year. And it is a long game. So some people tripled their revenue last year.
Wow.
Some people doubled their revenue. Some people discovered themselves and reemerged a totally different person with a completely new idea.
Yeah.
So the revenue wasn't the goal. The goal was, now I'm loving myself, forgiving myself. Now I have clarity in a whole new direction. Other people who had meteoric rises in the past realize they need to completely adult up in their business and rebuild their foundation in order to scale.
Wow.
So that's the truth of entrepreneurship. It's not all about the hockey stick revenue going up all the time. You need to, at these key milestones, right? So when you hit 200,000, sometimes you can figure you can't scale any farther because of your business model.
Yeah.
Because it's all one-to-one, and it's you and a client and an assignment. And then, you can maybe get to 250.
Yeah.
If you charge enough, maybe get to 300,000 in revenue, but you can't scale past that. So in order to scale to 500,000 to 7 figures and more, you need to have a team, and you need to have that plan, that money set aside. You need to have the proof of demand. You need to, all of these things. I come from a service space, so I look at customer lifetime value.
Yes.
And when someone goes through this program, what's the next step for them? And then what's the next step for them after that? So that you're keeping clients for longer, you get to work with fewer people, and you get to make a deeper impact.
Yeah, I love that.
So that's what I look for as far as success. But success has different metrics depending on where you are.
Yeah, I think that's so important to understand for people who are maybe thinking about going into entrepreneurship. Like, I will raise my hand and say, this year was not really a revenue goal kind of year for Unmarked Street or the business of apparel. I was in that third bucket that you said. I am a completely different person this year than I was at the end of last year. And that ended up being huge for what I think we're going to be able to do as we move forward in the future. But if I didn't take this year to kind of say, okay, we're going to take a hit on revenue because I need to do all of this work, we wouldn't be able to move forward in the way that we're planning. So I love that you brought that up. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about your current program. Like, how can people get a hold of you? How can people work with you? Because it sounds like it is the most amazing opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much, Rachel. It's easy to work with me. I'm on LinkedIn mostly. So
Great.
Just look for Deb Boulanger and we'll give you a link to that, I'm sure, on LinkedIn. Reach out in a direct message. Tell me that you heard me on the Business of Apparel podcast, which gets you an immediate link to my calendar. And let's talk about your business idea in a low impact way. There's no obligation. but I'll help you get clear on, and I'll be absolutely honest on exactly what it takes. So the launch lab is usually the first place people start, which is where we test your idea. We figure out your business model. We figure out your packaging, your pricing, your messaging, who the ideal clients are, who's not. And we get clarity on all the basic business foundations. And that's a 4-month program. And after that, it's the Reliable Revenue Mastermind, which is a 6-month program. And it's all about sales, marketing, technology, and mindset. All the things you need in order to get your engine of growth really working for you in your business. And after that, we have the Impact Builders program, which is for our alumni of the Accelerator and the Reliable Revenue Mastermind. And that's really about advancing you as a CEO.
Wow.
You know, who are you becoming? Who are you in community with other CEOs? How are you mastering your inner game? How are you mastering your metrics? How are you mastering your visibility strategies? Because to get to 7 figures, 8 figures and more, you as the face of the brand is important. So you need to be seen and heard. And so that way we need to backfill a lot of your operations to make sure you're not wearing all the hats. So there's very different roles that you play as CEO as your business grows.
That's amazing. Well, so go look for Deb on LinkedIn. Definitely put in the comments when you're reaching out to her that you heard her on the Business of Apparel podcast. And thank you so much for joining me today, Deb. This was so wonderful.
Oh, Rachel, thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation immensely.
Yeah. Okay. Talk soon. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Apparel podcast. I would so appreciate hearing your thoughts on the show. And if you know someone who could benefit from it, please share it with them. My biggest desire is to help other apparel professionals understand the nuances of our industry so we can all work toward making better product for a better world. If you would like to connect further, I'd love to invite you to send me a message through my website, unmarkstreet.com, where I do weekly trainings through my video channel, a monthly newsletter, and offer so many resources to help you start and scale a profitable apparel brand.